I'm going to take away the image of Scotty Greenwood, ice road trucker. I think that's the takeaway for me.
There you go. In an electric vehicle, no doubt.
Of course.
Welcome to Canusa Street, a podcast at the intersection of the issues and policies between Canada and the United States. Here are your hosts, Scotty Greenwood and Chris Sands.
Welcome back to Canusa Street, everybody. I'm Scotty Greenwood with the Canadian American Business Council, and I'm joined by my partner in crime, Chris Sands, who is currently working on his audio, but he'll be with us in a second. And I couldn't be more excited today for our recording. We have a guy with the world's most interesting job title, the Explorer in Residence for National Geographic, Enric Sala. And Chris will introduce him properly in a minute, but I have to say, you know, we were talking about Arctic policy, we were talking about climate change, and we were talking about guests that we'd like to invite to the podcast. And we immediately reached out to my good friend, Enric, and he was, of course, traveling the world, as he often is. And so I can't wait to hear about your adventures. And we'll also tell our listeners how we first met. It's a Canada-U.S. story that is kind of wonderful. And with that, Chris, maybe I've bought enough time for you to give us a proper introduction of our very esteemed guest.
Thanks very much, Scotty. I know our guest is an explorer. He's used to being more prepared than I am, but we have one thing in common, at least the university professor side. He was a university professor, and what I love about your bio, Dr. Sala, is you say you were a university professor who saw himself writing the obituary of ocean life. And it motivated you to be more than a professor lecturer, but actually to get involved, to do exploration, and to help us understand what was going on. As Scotty said, absolutely, he is an explorer in residence since 2011 at National Geographic, but he's also been a fellow there and a grantee. He's an expert on oceanography, marine biodiversity, marine sanctuaries, habitat preservation, biology, and very important these days, bees, which at least for a while we were quite worried about what was happening with the bees. And so all of that, I'll mind my B's and Q's with a Q from Scotty. I'll hand back over to her.
Thanks, Chris. So Enric and I first met when he was working on a project, Enric, that I hope you'll tell our listeners about, which was protecting the most pristine areas of the sea. And in Canada, that's the last sea ice. And so we met years ago to help with that project. And maybe you could explain a little bit about that and what you've been doing since, Enric. And welcome. Thank you so much for joining us.
It's so good to see you online, and nice to meet you, Chris. And it's such a pleasure being with you today. We definitely need to get in person sometime soon. Yeah, no, I remember when we met, we were... I left academia and came to National Geographic to found this project called Pristine Seas, to go around the world and work with communities and governments to protect some of the wildest places in the ocean before it's too late. And one of the areas that were on top of the list was what's called the last ice, which is the northernmost parts of the Canadian Arctic archipelago and the northernmost part of Greenland. These are the areas where we're going to see the last sea ice in the summer, because the projections are that because of ocean warming, by 2040, all the sea ice is going to melt across the Arctic Ocean, except in one place, the last place where we're going to have what's called multi-year ice that doesn't disappear every summer, which is that northern part of Canada. And in the very beginning, I didn't know where to start, who I should talk to. So, of course, I was immediately reaching out to Scotty for help to navigate the Canadian landscape. So that was really exciting. And actually, as you know, the Inuit leadership in the area in Nunavut, they were able to work with the Canadian government to get that place protected. And Prime Minister Trudeau announced it a couple years ago. And thanks to that, we gave him the National Geographic Planetary Leadership Award, but also to Inuit leaders, we gave them a special recognition for their leadership in in Arctic conservation.
One of the things, Enric, it was such a pleasure to work with you. I was a volunteer, just on the sidelines of that, and one of the things I didn't realize is, when you're trying to protect the wild places in Earth, everybody doesn't immediately agree, and the original cultures don't necessarily just say, "Sure, people, make our ancestral land a national park and protect it." They have other ideas, their own ideas, that have gone down for generations and generations. And so when you say the Inuit were partners in it, that is a huge accomplishment, and it's a tribute to your work and your research.
I want you to listen to the cracking sound. I can see the ice is like a wave, moving like a wave. If they become too big, it'll begin to break the ice. Then the ice will just snap.
In these last years, to be a hunter has become very hard. The old hunting grounds, like where they used to hunt, we cannot reach them anymore. They are just history now.
I'll just add one other thing that I think is interesting about the last sea ice, and then we'll talk about what you've been doing since then. And I'll let Chris get a word in here in a minute, too. He can ask a few questions, but I'm so excited to have you and catch up. But one of the things about the last ice to melt in the ocean is you explained to me years ago that the last sea ice is to Arctic creatures what a watering hole is to other creatures. It's life. It's what they rely on. And, it's funny because when we first met, I was very excited. I had been to Churchill, Manitoba. I had seen polar bears and beluga whales, and I just thought it was spectacular. And you immediately went up to me and showed me pictures that you had on your phone of narwhals that were right around the last sea ice. And all of these creatures rely on the last sea ice. So that was pretty fun, pretty great. So that was a few years ago, Enric. What have you been doing since then?
Well, first of all, I have to say that it was the Inuit leadership and initiative that got that place protected in the same way that they got the Lancaster Sound, Taluretipi-Manga, protected as a marine conservation zone. And it was our privilege to be able to support them in some way. And the product that we are most proud of, that we contributed with for this project, was our film, The Last Ice, which is on Disney Plus. If you have access to Disney Plus, it's a beautiful film about the Inuit culture. It's a film about indigenous rights. It's a film about how global warming is changing the landscape and affecting the cultures and traditions and the livelihoods of Inuit in Nunavut and in northern Greenland. So I really recommend everyone who's interested in the Canadian Arctic and even Greenland too, to watch it, because it's a testament to the wisdom and the leadership of the Inuit people. And since then, we've been working with local communities, indigenous peoples, and governments around the world to continue helping to protect areas. And it's been pretty awesome, because I just came back from Madeira of Portugal, where the regional president created the largest no-take marine reserve in the European Union. So that's the 25th marine reserve that Pristine Seas has been involved with. So we're very, very happy.
I wanted to ask you a little bit about that, because the relationship between the Inuit and the non-Inuit populations in the U.S. and in Canada is important. But how do you find the government cooperation between the U.S. and Canada? We share three oceans. Even the U.S. has an Arctic frontage, but we also have the Atlantic and the Pacific. And sometimes we seem to be cooperating, but I know other times we're moving across purposes. So without necessarily a political spin on, Republican or Democrat or liberal or conservative, what's the sense of the U.S.? Do they see themselves in a common enterprise, or are they fighting more often than they should be? How would you characterize it?
Well, I wouldn't say fighting, but I would hope to see more collaboration, because when you talk to the people who are actually working with their Canadian counterparts, they will tell you that, oh yeah, there is this ongoing collaboration, which is true. But then there could be much more. For example, Canada has been one of the one of the leading countries pushing for a global target for nature, which is 30% of the planet, land and sea, protected by 2030. Former Environment Minister Jonathan Wilkinson, he was an absolute champion of this, helping to recruit other countries. And we started with one country, Costa Rica, a couple of years ago at the Climate COP in Madrid. And at this COP in Glasgow in October, 77 countries are already supporting that global target. The US has a domestic target. President Biden has this domestic target of 30% of areas protected or conserved, but it hasn't joined the global target yet, right? So there, Canada is moving forward faster, and also the federal government has committed significant funding for feasibility studies for indigenous protected and conserved areas, but also has committed funding for the implementation and the long-term management. So I would say that the relationship between the federal government and indigenous peoples in Canada, First Nations and Inuit, from what I've seen, is quite promising. And actually, we are next year, our National Geographic Pristine Seas project is going to conduct a 2-month expedition, and the Canadian Arctic, partnering with 4 Inuit communities and 2 First Nations to support them with our science and our filming and our economic work to support their vision to create more of these indigenous marine protected areas.
Fascinating. I wanted to ask you also, because you're in the research field, and research takes money, sadly, especially if you're doing the scientific research. I think I could probably research more cheaply if I'm just talking to politicians. But in your field, how are we doing in terms of research funding and research activity? We've got great universities in Canada, the U.S. There's potential for collaboration, but sometimes the money doesn't cross the border well, or there are too many strings attached. What could we be doing to do research together better?
Well, to do research together better, we still, first we need to improve the research budgets in both countries, period. And especially on this side of the border in the United States, much more funding is required for some important research. And we've seen a decline in funding over the last 4 years. Hopefully now it's going to increase again. But, scientists collaborate all the time. There are hundreds of research papers, if not thousands, published every year in partnership between Canadian and U.S. researchers. And we published a major paper in the journal Nature last March with a global map for priorities for ocean conservation. And we had Canadian co-authors on the paper, both from Dalhousie University and University of British Columbia. So there is a lot of research that is already happening that does not require big funding. But of course, if we want to do field work, then this is where we require a lot of resources, as you know well. So the collaboration has been ongoing for many decades, and it's really, really strong. But definitely more funding for important things like nature conservation and understanding ways to mitigate climate change, especially in the Arctic region, would be much more important than funds that are used for things that are actually not so important for society, but they are, there are very important pressure groups that monopolize government resources.
Everybody needs money. I know how that goes. Anyway, over to you, Scotty.
Well, so I just want to go back for a second, Enric. You said I think I heard you say you're going to do a 2-year expedition in the Canadian Arctic starting next year.
2 months.
Oh, 2 month. Can you tell us about that? Where are you going? When does that begin? What are you looking for? Really interested in that.
We have been approached by several communities to help support their projects for creation of new marine conservation areas or indigenous marine protected areas. And what we do with Pristine Seas is several things. We do scientific research. So we have a team of marine scientists that do let's say, rapid assessments of the health of the marine ecosystem from the surface to the deepest parts of the ocean, from inshore to offshore. Also, we produce films. National Geographic, for 133 years, we've done storytelling. So we produce films of different shapes and formats to reach key audiences among these communities, but also among decision makers in different governments, to inspire them to protect these places. We also conduct economic analysis, evaluation of what are the economic benefits that those communities obtain from the ocean right now, and what would be the additional benefits that they could obtain if part of their waters were protected. And finally, of course, we have always done this bridge between the top down and the bottom up, bridging the central governments with the local community leaders to make sure that the demands from local communities are heard by those who have the final authority to pass legislation to protect these areas. But, in the end, everything we do is to support indigenous peoples and local communities who want to preserve part of their waters so they can continue enjoying them sustainably for the long term.
When I think about your work, your life's work, you travel the world all the time. I love your out of office messages when you and I reach out, because it's like I'm on an expedition in some place that I can't even pronounce, and it's always amazing. And I love seeing the pictures and the work that comes out of it. But I want to ask you, in your travels around the world and in what you're doing to protect nature and to protect the pristine seas, maybe give us one area that worries you the most, one, whether it's a geographic area or an issue, and then also one that gives you the most hope, that makes you, the happiest from anywhere at all in the world.
Yeah, well, there are two areas that worry me the most. One is coral reefs, because we are seeing death of coral all around the world because of ocean warming and acidification. And the other one is the Arctic, which is warming on average twice faster than the rest of the world. And there are areas like the Barents Sea that is warming some years 4 times faster. The sea ice is disappearing so much faster during the summer that affects the entire ecology and, of course, the livelihoods and the cultures of the Arctic peoples. So these are two areas that worry me the most. And in terms of hope, it is every place where an area is protected from fishing, drilling, mining, and damaging activities, marine life recovers spectacularly. I've seen it with my own eyes. We just came back from an expedition to the Southern Line Islands that belongs to the Republic of Kiribati in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. Islands that are protected and inhabited, where the corals were absolutely virgin the first time we went there in 2009. But in 2016, there was the most massive warming event in the Pacific Ocean, the strongest El Nino year, that killed half of the corals in the most pristine islands during the summer. We just came back. We were there this October, 5 years after that massive bleaching and coral death, and the reef came back completely. The marine life has an incredible ability to bounce back if we just give it space and time. So that's what gives me hope, seeing the ability of the ocean to bounce back if we just give it some space.
We recently saw the U.S. Coast Guard ship Healy go on an Arctic journey, and I know that it was a joint mission. Canada had some scientific research going on in that vessel as well, and I wonder if you could talk a little bit to the role of sort of the platform for research. Neither of our countries has very many icebreakers that can operate. There are some issues where scientists like yourself will often look for some support or some infrastructure to be able to operate and do their work in the Arctic. How would you say we're fit for operation? And if we were going to invest in things like infrastructure, like icebreakers, these kind of things come up all the time, where could we do the most good?
Well, if the U.S. is not fit for Arctic work during the ice months, that's clear. Now, Russia has 40 icebreakers. Most of them nuclear icebreakers. I've seen a few of them. They are enormous. They are very powerful and effective. We have one, and I don't know what's the life left on that poor icebreaker. There's been one in the books and budgeted for years now, but I don't know how this is going. So we are ill-equipped to conduct research during outside of the summer in the Arctic, and this is something that definitely has to improve because the sea ice is melting. So navigation in the summer and shipping is going to become more prevalent. So it's easier to study the Arctic now during the summer, but still there is so much we need to learn about the processes of when does the ice start to form in the fall and when the ice starts to melt earlier and earlier. And for this, you still need icebreakers, right? Mm-hmm. So this is an area where there's a huge gap, and we are definitely losers in the global arena.
Canada was a big leader in pulling together the Arctic Council, and it's been around now for a while. Do you think that this multilateral cooperation, and I know there are countries that are members of the council, some are observers, etc., do you think they've had a collective impact that has been a positive one on the research agenda, the scientific exploration and understanding of the Arctic? Or would you say that's mainly economic cooperation, maybe economic development? How would you characterize the role the Arctic Council can play or does play?
Yeah, I would say both, because it is the intergovernmental platform where all Arctic nations sit together and talk. And we know, especially working with Russia, the Russians, they appreciate talking and discussions and negotiation, right? So that platform, every single Arctic country take it very seriously. And I think that it has definitely improved cooperation, not only economic, but that was going to happen regardless of the platform, because businesses always find a way to do whatever they need internationally, right? when it's good for business. But for the political discussion and dialogue and for scientific research, for cooperation, I think it's been very valuable.
The Arctic Council may be the platform for Arctic dialogues. Canusa Street is the platform for Canada-US, so I'm really glad to have you here. Over to you, Scotty, to talk about, maybe to close us out.
Well, thanks, Chris. And I think I'd like to give the last word to my good friend Enric, because I have been so inspired by your work over the years. I hope people will check out the movies and the storytelling that you've been so integral to. But why don't we wrap by giving you the last word to talk about anything you want to talk about?
Okay. Well, I would like to end with a message of hope. We are overfishing the ocean, polluting it with plastic and things we cannot see. We are making it warmer and more acidic. Marine life is being degraded all over the planet. But we know what the solutions are. We know that when we protect places, marine life comes back spectacularly and helps to regenerate the areas around. Because we've seen all around the world that these no-take areas increase the abundance of fish on average 6 times relative to unprotected areas nearby. And that spillover of fish helps to improve the fishing, the food security around these areas, especially for coastal communities in developing countries. And also we know that protection of the ocean generates more benefits than the costs. And on average, every $1 that is invested in the management of a marine protected area generates at least $5 in return. That's a pretty good, 500% return on investment. That's pretty good. So what we need to do now is to the countries of the world, following the leadership of Canada and others, to agree to protect 30% of the planet, land and sea, by 2030, because that's going to help us mitigate climate change. That's going to help solve the nature crisis, and that's going to help preserve our life support system. Because society is absolutely dependent on a healthy natural world. So thank you so much, Scotty and Chris, for having me on your podcast.
It's been great.
Thank you so much. And I hope you'll come back after you've had your 2 months in the Canadian Arctic and tell us what your findings were and share with us some stories and some pictures. We'd love to hear all about it.
I would love that. Right. Better. Why don't you come on the expedition?
You don't have to ask twice. I'll be there.
Well, we could extend Canusa Street north. That's infrastructure too. So we'll just have it go all the way up like the Alaska Highway.
Yeah, that's right. Canusa Street's going to become an ice road any moment. And we're going to go right up on the expedition. But no kidding. I love traveling up north. I've led a few delegations. And as I said at the beginning, as much fun as I have with the belugas and the polar bears, I think Enric sort of wins with his experience of narwhals, which seem like mythical creatures, and to see them yourself is quite amazing, and it's inspirational. So with that, thank you so much. As always, it's great to gather and talk about these big issues, and we really will bring you back, Enric, and maybe I'll come back with some stories. I don't know if we can drag Chris up there, but maybe we can.
I'm going to take away the image of Scotty Greenwood, ice road trucker. I think that's the takeaway.
In an electric vehicle, no doubt.
Of course.
This podcast is brought to you by the Canadian American Business Council and the Wilson Center. If you like this episode, help others find our show and give us a rating on Apple Podcasts or Spotify.